What's up, everybody? Thank you or I should say, I'm sorry that you have to listen to me ramble on about another chapter. Hopefully, it can be somewhat interesting. This week, I am looking at chapter 13 of the Curriculum Studies Reader, Curriculum and Consciousness. This chapter was written by Maxine Green, and before I read these chapters that are assigned, I like to give a little context and see who the author is, what they did, when they wrote, and which is finding context is actually kind of the fact that I did that is appropriate for what we'll discuss in this chapter later. But Maxine Green was really cool. She was a pioneer for women in education, and really is like it was inspirational to read about actually, and did a lot of cool things and achieved an incredible amount in her lifetime, and very respected. And I had never heard of her before, which is a shame. She eventually presided over the AERA. Some of the things that she was known for were some ideas: aesthetic education, social imagination, and wide awareness. And specifically in this chapter, this article that she wrote, the purpose, and I'm going to quote her because I think she sums it up better than I can. And the last sentence of this chapter is: to plunge in, to choose, to disclose, to move. This is the road, it seems to me, to mastery. And basically what she means there is learning an element of the curriculum, or the curriculum as a whole, is not a passive action. Or I guess that's kind of an oxymoron. It's not a passive act. You can't just sit and absorb. You have to be involved. I mean, just look at the words used there: to plunge, to choose, to disclose, to move. Those are all things that a person does. It's not passive. And so to me, that's the purpose, is that in designing curriculum, you need to keep that in mind, that people learn by doing, not just sitting back and taking it in. And some of the summary of the argument that she gives in this chapter is, she starts the chapter, to me, by painting kind of a grim picture of curriculum from the student's perspective. She writes, and this is a quote: "Curriculum for the learner's standpoint ordinarily represents little more than an arrangement of subjects, a structure of socially prescribed knowledge, or a complex system of meaning, which may or may not fall within his grasp." So again, it's basically, to me, when I read that, I think of, these people sitting up somewhere designing all of these things and not keeping the person in mind who is actually learning them. She later explains, again, this is a quote, that we are preoccupied with priorities, purposes, programs of intended learning and intended or unintended manipulation. We pay too little attention to the individual in quest of his own future, bent on surpassing what is merely given on breaking through every day. So again, to me, that just means, like, as a whole, writers of curriculum are too focused on, like it says there, purposes, programs, priorities, instead of what do we want the learner to get out of what is being taught. She then argues that looking at works of art, particularly literature, cannot just be looked at on their surface and in the context we imagine that the creator envisioned, whatever they created. But the student must become a critic of consciousness, meaning that students must dive into the work, explore its themes from their point of view, and their experiences, and that will provide a clear understanding of the work as a whole. And again, it may not be the way the author intended this meaning, but that's not really the point. To me, is what Green's saying is, if you really want a student to read a work of art and connect with it and learn it, then they need to be the one looking at that from where they come from, relating it to themselves. Excuse me. Green argues that curriculum of the past is presented almost backwards. It has been presented as a way, that like students. Sorry, let me. Yes, I have my notes here. Let me get back on track. So Green argues that curriculum in the past has been presented in a backwards way. It has been presented as a way to influence the way students see the world. And instead, curriculum should be influenced by students' experiences and perceptions. Then real understanding and growth can occur. Excuse me. So, again, curriculum needs to be written with the learner in mind, and especially taught with the learner in mind, knowing that, the goal is to develop new understandings and to think differently about the world and to think critically about what's going on around you. But that can't, and often is not, the first step. First, the student must engage in what is being taught in order to understand it, and then take that to open up new understandings and new ways of perceiving or seeing the world, new perceptions. The way time, and I thought this was interesting, is kind of the end in her article, is she discusses how culture and this time that she's living in and writing in feels just continually sped up. And I think a lot of people now feel that way, is, things are just moving faster and faster and faster. And so the contemporary learner must be one that uses curriculum to orient himself to the world around him. And this will help him restore order. A learner must have experience doing this in order to succeed. That should help shape the curriculum. In this world that we're living in that seems sped up, we need to prepare students to deal with that, to cope with that, to be able to take in information, digest it, and restore order to their lives and what's around them. A learner needs to confront knowledge, and this is something that an example or kind of a metaphor that she gives, is a learner needs to confront knowledge like a man with a map who is trying to figure out where he wants to go in relation to where he is. And that's what we as educators need to be thinking about as we write curriculum, as we teach, that we are trying to get we want students to be able to take in information and get from where they are to where they want to go. And finally, the importance of learners seeing the curriculum in a way that provides connections to their world. And like I said at the beginning, I'd never heard of Maxine Green, which is a shame. But I've always, and I don't want to give myself too much credit here, but it was mostly just because of my schooling experience. But when I was teaching, you look at the curriculum and what you're told to assign to read, the short stories, and I was an English teacher, the short stories, the novels, the poems, and just to be frank, those aren't always what a high school aged student wants to read. And so you can't just say, here's a great work of art, read it, enjoy it, understand it. Because we all know the average 10th grader is going to be like, okay, let me read this and I get on TikTok as soon as possible and never really digest it, and so I would always try to do things, like if you were in this character's shoes, we all saw this character chose A, would you have chosen A and for what reason? Or would you have turned around and chosen B and for what reason? Or even put them in the author's shoes, like the author chose to do this. Why did she choose to do this? and why would you have chosen the same or opposite? You know, and when you do have freedom to choose what you read or what your students read, you know, you can do a better job at, you know, picking things that can relate to them. But like Maxine Green argued, is, you know, we're trying to prepare these students for the sped up world, and the sped up world is not always going to give them something that relates to them. So they must take their surroundings and relate it to them, and then, you know, as she said, restore order. You know, so when they are assigned to read, you know, something that doesn't relate to them, we as educators need to be able to give them the tools to, like, and this is like in my head, this is what I picture, is you step into that novel or poem or short story and kind of look around, like, what does this mean to me? How do my experiences shape the way I interpret this interaction between characters? And that's part of why I liked teaching English, is you kind of have the freedom to do those things and to you know, manipulate the curriculum in a way that fits your students. And I, like I said, I've only ever taught English, so I know it's harder for other subjects. But to me, I mean, I enjoyed reading this chapter, and I thought she had some great ideas. And you know, like I said, it was a shame that I had never heard of her before. But I feel like her ideas eventually got to me through some class or through some professional development. So that was chapter 13, Curriculum and Consciousness. Thanks for listening to me ramble.